There are fortunes, and then there are forces of nature. What we're about to do is dissect the strategy of a man who didn't just build a company, he built a private government of energy. He created a blueprint for monopoly that, believe me, still echoes today. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller.
So let's just start with the central question, right? Because it's not just about getting rich. It's about a level of power so absolute, so total, that a sovereign nation is forced to change its own laws just to deal with you. To get to the answer, we have to look past the money and into the machine he built.
And let's start with the end result of that machine. $500 billion. That's the estimate of Rockefeller's fortune in today's money. But even that number doesn't really capture it. This wasn't just wealth, it was a dominant slice of the entire American economy. He didn't just own things, he controlled the very energy that powered a civilization. To really understand how he did it, we're going to break his strategy down into 4 parts. First, we'll get inside the mind of the man himself. Then, we'll dissect the mechanics of his monopoly, watch the inevitable backlash, and finally, uncover the legacy of his playbook, which, you'll see, is still very much in use.
You know, every great empire is built on a core philosophy. And for Rockefeller, that philosophy wasn't greed, or even ambition, as we usually think of it. No, it was an obsession with order.
And this slide right here pinpoints the true origin of his power. And spoiler alert, it wasn't oil. At 16, as an assistant bookkeeper, he fell in love with accounting, with the pure, cold logic of margins. He figured out that if you know your costs to the fraction of a cent, while everyone else is just guessing, well, you can outlast them, you can underprice them, and ultimately, you can consume them. This wasn't business. This was industrial arithmetic.
Okay, so now let's look at how that obsession with numbers got weaponized. That discipline was about to be unleashed on the chaotic, messy, fragmented oil industry of the time. You see, Rockefeller looked at all that chaos not as a risk, but as raw material for building his own orderly system.
His first big tool was something called horizontal integration. The idea is simple: buy the people who do what you do. But the way he executed it was anything but. His goal wasn't just to win the game, it was to clear the entire board of all the other players.
And this perfectly illustrates his method. It was called the Cleveland Massacre, and it was a systematic campaign. First, he identified the weakness, dozens of small, inefficient refiners. Then he used his perfect knowledge of costs to just squeeze their margins to nothing. And then came the offer: sell out to my company, Standard Oil, or face bankruptcy. In a shockingly short amount of time, he had absorbed or eliminated almost all of them.
But buying your rivals? That's a brute force tactic. Rockefeller's true genius was far more subtle, far more elegant. He understood that in the industrial age, the one who controls the arteries of commerce, the logistics, controls everything. He weaponized the railroads. As his shipping volume exploded, he went to the railroads and demanded secret discounts, or rebates. So as you can see here, this created a structural advantage that was just mathematically impossible for his competitors to overcome. They were paying full price to ship their oil, while he was paying a fraction. But it gets darker. He also negotiated drawbacks, where the railroads would actually pay Standard Oil a fee on every single barrel a competitor shipped. Just think about that. His rivals were literally paying him to compete against them.
So, with his horizontal control locked down, he moved to the final phase: vertical integration. He wasn't just selling kerosene anymore. He was controlling the entire journey, from the moment the oil came out of the ground to the moment it was lit in a lamp. He built his own pipelines, his own storage facilities, his own distribution networks. It was a completely closed system, an economic fortress that no outsider could possibly get into.
And the result of all these strategies? This. By the 1880s, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of all oil refining in the entire United States. That's not a market share. That's a form of private sovereignty over a strategic national resource.
And behind it all, behind every move, was this core belief: competition is a sin. To Rockefeller, competition was just wasteful, chaotic, and inefficient. The highest form of business, the most responsible path, was to eliminate it completely and impose a single rational order: his order.
But a force that powerful inevitably creates an equal and opposite reaction. The very system he had so perfectly mastered was beginning to see him not as a captain of industry, but as a threat to its own existence.
For decades, public outcry and political pressure just kept mounting. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed largely with Standard Oil in mind. And finally, after years and years of legal battles, the case made it to the highest court in the land. In 1911, the verdict came down. The empire had to be broken up.
These were the 5 words that brought the giant down. The Supreme Court ruled that what Standard Oil was doing wasn't just normal business. Its purpose was the exclusion of others and the total domination of an industry. It was, legally, an unreasonable restraint of trade.
But here, this is the greatest irony in the entire story. The government's victory, the one act that was supposed to dismantle his power for good, ended up being the single most profitable event of his entire life. And that brings us to the final and most astounding part of this story. Because while the company was fractured into pieces, the man, his wealth, and his strategic blueprint became more influential than ever. You see, the beast was slain, but its DNA survived.
So how did that happen? Well, before the breakup, Rockefeller owned a controlling stake in one massive trust. After the court order, he was given proportional shares in all 34 of the newly independent baby standards, companies you might have heard of like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. And as those companies went out and competed with each other and grew, the value of his diversified holdings just skyrocketed. He became far, far richer in defeat than he had ever been in victory.
So why does a story from over 100 centuries ago matter so much right now? Because the Rockefeller playbook, it's timeless. Whenever you see a race to control a critical resource, the lithium we need for batteries, the foundries that make semiconductors, the server farms that store all our data, you are seeing a modern echo of this exact strategy. The goal is always the same: control the bottleneck, and you control the entire system.
So, if we boil this whole epic down, what are the key lessons for today? First, the most powerful position isn't always the flashiest one. Real power lies in controlling the bottleneck. Second, logistics aren't just a cost of doing business. They're a weapon, and often more powerful than the product itself. And finally, a crucial warning. Dominate too completely, and the system you've mastered will, eventually, rewrite its own rules just to stop you.
In the end, Rockefeller's story is really the story of modern capitalism itself. It shows us how the system both rewards that kind of intense concentration and how it ultimately punishes it. He wrote the blueprint. And that leaves all of us with a critical question for our own time. We know the playbook. We can see the new strategic resources. The only unknown is, who will control the bottleneck this time?